They say what you don't know can't hurt you. But what if you booked an Airbnb, went to sleep in what looked like a cozy guest room, and later discovered you weren't alone? Imagine waking up to learn that every moment you spent in that bed was being watched by hidden eyes. If this happened to you, what would you do? Before we get into the full story, kindly give this video a like. It really helps YouTube show it to more people who love scary stories like you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one if you genuinely like what I do here. Turn on post notification too if you want to get notified when I send a gift your way. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time is it there. Now turn on the fan to have that soothing background hum while you listen. Story 1. When I travel for work, I usually book Airbnbs instead of hotels. They feel more personal, less sterile, and often cheaper. Last summer, I booked a small 2-bedroom cottage in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The photos online made it look warm and inviting. Light blue shutters, flower pots on the windowsills, and cozy furniture inside. I arrived in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The sky turned shades of pink and orange as I rolled my suitcase up the little stone pathway. Inside, everything was just like the pictures. The living room had a worn leather sofa, a flat-screen TV, and shelves full of random books. The bedroom I chose was small but comfortable. White walls, a queen bed with a quilted comforter, and a nightstand with a lamp that gave off a soft glow. There was even a bowl of wrapped candies waiting for me. After a long day of travel, I felt lucky. I settled in quickly, unpacked a few things, and made myself a cup of tea in the tiny kitchen. The neighborhood was silent, except for the occasional bark of a dog far away. I told myself I'd get an early night, since I had a meeting in the morning. As I climbed into bed, I felt the kind of tiredness that pulls you under quickly. But then something strange happened. Lying on my back, staring up at the ceiling, I noticed a faint red in the corner of the room. At first I thought it was just the smoke detector, but the more I looked, the less it resembled one. The light was steady, not blinking. My stomach tightened as I reached for the lamp and turned it off, just to see. In the dark, the dot glowed even brighter. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a weird kind of sensor, maybe an old piece of equipment. But as I stared at it, I realized it was angled down, directly at the bed. I pulled the covers higher and turned to my side, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept imagining someone, somewhere watching me in real time. Every movement I made, every breath. An hour must have passed before I forced myself up. I grabbed the chair from the corner and climbed on it, reaching for the device. It was small, black, and barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. And yes, it was a camera. A tiny hidden lens pointed right at me. I froze with it in my hand, my mind racing. Who had been watching me? How long had it been there? Was it live streaming or just recording? My first instinct was to pack my things and leave immediately. But it was midnight and I didn't know the area. Hotels nearby were all booked when I checked earlier. My phone buzzed with low battery, and for a moment, I felt trapped in someone else's setup. I tried to sleep on the couch in the living room instead, telling myself it would be safer. But even there, I couldn't shake the thought that other cameras might be hidden in the lamps, or behind picture frames, or tucked into the bookshelf. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the faint hum of the fridge, sounded suspicious. Sometime past 2, I must have drifted off. That's when I had the strangest dream. I dreamed I was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, but I couldn't move. In the dream, a man stood in the corner of the room, right where the camera had been, just watching me. His face was blurred, like static on a TV. He never said a word. He just leaned closer, as if trying to memorize every detail of me. I woke up sweating, my mouth dry, my body stiff. The dream felt so real that I checked the bedroom again. The chair I had left under the camera was pushed aside. The candy bowl on the nightstand was gone. I told myself maybe I moved the chair in the night. Maybe I ate the candy before bed and forgot. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. By morning, I packed and left before the sun was fully up. I never confronted the host. I never reported it. I just drove away, shaken, checking the mirrors every few minutes to see if anyone was following me. To this day, I can't explain the dream or why the room didn't look the same when I woke up. I sometimes wonder if the man in the corner was real, if he had stood there while I slept, recording me not just through the camera, but with his own eyes. Would you have stayed the night after finding that camera? Or would you have run, even in the middle of the night? Story 2. I've always relied on rideshare apps when I'm traveling. They're usually quick, safe, and cheaper than taxis. One night last spring, after a late dinner with colleagues in another city, I ordered an Uber back to my hotel. It was a little after midnight. The streets were almost empty, and a light rain made everything shine under the streetlights. When the car pulled up, it was a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver rolled down the passenger side window and called my name. He smiled, a normal, polite smile, and I got in. The inside smelled faintly of air freshener and leather. The dashboard glowed soft blue from the GPS. I buckled my seatbelt and checked the map on my phone. It showed a straight route to the hotel, about 15 minutes away. I sat back and tried to relax, watching raindrops slide down the glass. The driver didn't say much, just a few comments about the weather and how quiet the night was. About 5 minutes into the ride, I noticed he hadn't taken the highway ramp the app suggested. Instead, we stayed on smaller, darker streets lined with warehouses and closed shops. I leaned forward and asked if there was a traffic jam on the highway. He said, without looking at me, that this route was faster. His voice was calm, but it sounded like a rehearsed answer. Something felt off. I glanced at my phone again. The little blue on the screen had shifted. We were no longer heading toward my hotel, but into an area I didn't recognize. I spoke up again, trying to keep my voice steady. Hey, can you just follow the app's route? I'm not in a hurry. He didn't answer right away. He just kept driving. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. Don't worry. I know a better way. I tried the door handle quietly. It didn't open. The child lock was on. My stomach tightened. I typed a message to a friend. This Uber isn't taking me to my hotel, and shared my location. No response yet. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But the farther we drove, the darker it got. The streetlights thinned out. The buildings gave way to empty lots, and the rain began to fall harder. Then he turned off the main road onto a narrow lane lined with trees. There were no houses, no signs, no other cars. Just darkness and the sound of wet tires on gravel. I said his name louder now. Please stop the car. He didn't stop. He didn't even blink. I tried the other door. Same thing, locked. The windows wouldn't roll down either. My hands trembled as I opened the Uber app and hit the emergency button. The screen spun for a second, showing it was calling 911. But before I could speak, the signal dropped. No bars. The driver finally said something, his eyes still fixed on the road. Almost there. Almost where? I scanned the car for anything I could use. My bag was at my feet. Inside was a small metal water bottle. I gripped it tightly just in case. We drove another few minutes like that, me gripping the bottle, him silent. Then, out of nowhere, he slowed down. Ahead, a single streetlight illuminated a small clearing with a chain-link fence and an old wooden sign I couldn't read from the car. He pulled over, stopped the engine, and turned to face me for the first time since we left. His smile was gone. You shouldn't be out this late, he said softly. People do bad things at night. I don't know where the courage came from, but I raised the bottle and shouted, Unlock the door now. My voice cracked, but it was loud enough to echo in the empty space outside. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, without saying anything, he pressed a button on the dashboard. The doors clicked open. I bolted out of the car into the rain, not even closing the door behind me. My shoes slipped on the wet gravel as I ran toward the main road. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he was following me. It felt like forever before I saw headlights in the distance. A truck passing by. I waved frantically until it slowed. The driver rolled down his window, and I blurted out that I needed help. He let me climb in, and we drove to the nearest gas station where I called the police. By the time they checked the location I sent earlier, the black sedan was gone. The driver's profile vanished from the app too. No record of the trip except the initial receipt on my phone. I never found out who he was, or where he was taking me. Sometimes I wonder if he was planning to hurt me, or if he was just trying to scare me. But every time I order a rideshare now, I check the locks, the route, and the driver's face before I even get inside. Would you have tried to fight your way out? Or waited, hoping he would let you go? Story 3. If you've ever had to sleep in a new place, you know how every little sound feels magnified. That's what I told myself the first time I heard it. A faint shuffle, like someone moving inside my closet while I lay in bed. If you heard footsteps coming from inside your closet at night, would you dare to open the door? I had just moved into a small apartment after finally landing a new job. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A one-bedroom unit with creaky hardwood floors, a drafty window, and a closet just big enough to hang a week's worth of clothes. The first night, I was exhausted from unpacking, so I threw some boxes into the closet, slid the door shut, and collapsed into bed. The street outside was quiet, just the occasional rumble of a passing car. My bedside clock ticked softly, the only steady sound in the room. I pulled the blanket up, breathing in the faint scent of detergent from the clean sheets, and let my eyes close. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. A dull thump, followed by something softer, almost like fabric brushing against wood. I opened my eyes and stared at the closet door across from my bed. Nothing moved. I waited, straining to listen, but the sound didn't come again. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination and drifted off. The second night was different. I turned off the lamp and was almost asleep when I heard it again. This time clearer, a deliberate step, then another, like someone pacing in a small space. My chest tightened as I turned my head toward the closet. The door was shut, just as I'd left it, but I could hear the faint creak of the wooden floorboards inside, as if weight was shifting back and forth. I sat up slowly, heart racing, and tried to think logically. Maybe a neighbor's noise was carrying through the walls. Maybe a pipe was knocking, but I couldn't explain why the sound was so close, why it seemed to be coming from right behind that thin wooden door. I climbed out of bed, walked to the closet, and placed my hand on the door handle. For a long second, I stood there, barely breathing. Then I slid the door open in one quick motion. Inside, it was just as I'd left it. Boxes stacked on the floor, clothes hanging loosely, a pair of shoes in the corner. No one there. No space for anyone to hide. I let out a shaky laugh at myself, shut the door, and climbed back into bed. But just as I started to relax, it happened again. A soft step, this time from the far side of the closet, deeper in, where there shouldn't have been room for anything. I gripped the blanket tight, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. Slowly, I drifted into a restless sleep. The third night was worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of steady pacing. 5 steps, a pause, then 5 steps back. Over and over, like someone trapped in a tiny cell. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the closet door. The noise stopped instantly. I stared at the door for what felt like hours, my phone light casting harsh shadows across the room. Just when I thought it was safe to close my eyes, I heard something that chilled me more than footsteps. A whisper. Faint, but clear enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. Words I couldn't make out, low and muffled, seeping through the thin wood. I didn't open the closet that time. Couldn't. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed like that until morning, too scared to move. Over the next week, the sounds never stopped. Sometimes it was footsteps, sometimes the whispering. Once, I heard what sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the inside of the door. Scrape. Pause. Scrape again. I started sleeping with the lamp on, but even the light didn't help. I'd lie there, eyes wide open, watching the shadows gather around the closet, waiting for the door to slide open on its own. But it never did. It just stayed shut, like it was holding something back. The breaking point came one night when I woke to the sound of the door actually moving. Not swinging wide, but sliding open an inch, then stopping. I couldn't see inside, just darkness beyond the crack. I couldn't move either. I just lay there, staring, until I finally worked up the nerve to grab my phone. I snapped a picture with the flash on. When I looked at the photo, my stomach dropped. In the bright glare, I could see my boxes, my hanging clothes, and something else. A shape, not solid, not clear, but darker than the shadows around it. A figure, crouched low in the corner of the closet, its head tilted toward the crack in the door. I dropped the phone, heart pounding, and when I looked back up, the door was shut again. No sound, no movement, just the faint tick of the clock by my bed. The next morning, I moved out. I told my landlord I had to leave for work reasons, and I never went back for the boxes I left behind. Sometimes I wonder what I would have seen if I'd had the courage to slide that door open all the way. Would you have opened the closet that night, or kept pretending nothing was there? Story 4. If you ever hear your baby calling for you through a monitor when the baby is asleep in your arms, don't assume it's just a glitch. I heard my daughter laugh over the monitor one night, and it was a laugh she hadn't learned yet. It sounded like two people at once, young and old, and the sound still follows me when I close my eyes. I brought my daughter home from the hospital on a rainy afternoon in October. The first few weeks were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and little naps that felt like the only peace I had all day. The nursery was just down the hall from our bedroom. I set up the baby monitor on the dresser facing the crib, an old but reliable model with a small screen and a soft green glow. At night, it made a low hum I found oddly comforting. My partner worked nights, so most evenings I was alone with the baby, learning names of cries and how to soothe her back to sleep. The house was quiet on that first official night at home. The fan in the bedroom made a steady sound. The clock beside my bed clicked in a steady rhythm. I put the baby in her swaddle and tucked her into the crib. Her chest rose and fell in tiny, calm waves. I watched her for a few minutes, then went back to our room and set the monitor on the nightstand. The screen showed a small, grainy view of the crib, and the audio picked up the soft whimper as she settled. I told myself I would check on her every hour, but the comfort of the monitor made that feel safe. About 2 hours after I fell asleep, I woke to the monitor lighting up. The speaker hissed, then a soft sound came through. At first it seemed like static. Then it shaped into a voice saying, "Mama." It was so clear I sat up, wide awake. The word was breathy and small. In the dark of the bedroom, I could see the monitor's little green light flashing as it picked up the sound. I pressed the bedside lamp on and squinted at the small screen. The crib was empty on the feed. The room looked the same as it had when I fell asleep. I picked up the monitor and walked down the hall. The nursery door was closed. I eased it open and saw my daughter curled under her blanket, asleep. Her face was peaceful. I stood there for a long minute, watching the rise and fall of her chest. I whispered, "You okay?" And she didn't stir. I put the monitor back on the nightstand and went to bed, telling myself it was only my tired brain. That same voice came again the next night. This time it said my name. It whispered it like someone saying goodnight through a door. My throat clenched in a way I can't easily describe. I grabbed the monitor and walked to the nursery, but again the crib was still. My daughter slept on, and I felt foolish for being afraid in the bright hallway light. I checked the device for any interference, unplugged it, and plugged it back in. The manual said nothing about voices that sounded like mine. After that, the sounds started getting stranger. Sometimes it was a low humming, like someone humming a lullaby my grandmother used to sing. Other times it was a soft giggle, but the tone was wrong, too deep for a baby and too clipped for an adult. Once, while I was holding the baby and rocking her, the monitor picked up a whisper that said, "Don't put her down." I looked down at my daughter, who was blinking sleepily. I looked up at the monitor and the image of the crib. Empty. I hugged her tighter and wondered who would say that and why. A few nights later, I decided to test it. I left the monitor on the dresser and walked into the living room with the baby in my arms, then closed the nursery door. I watched the screen as I sat on the couch. For a while, nothing happened. Then the green light flickered and a sound came through, faint and layered, like two recordings playing at once. I could hear breathing and a childish laugh that seemed to come from both the monitor and behind me. I spun around. The living room was empty. My chest tightened in a way that made me catch my breath, and I realized I was shaking. I pressed the pause button on the monitor, then hit mute. The house went quiet except for the refrigerator's low hum. I started keeping a notebook beside the crib, writing down every time something odd happened. The entries grew longer and more frantic. October 22nd, whisper mama. October 25th, laugh not hers. October 28th, told me not to put her down. I read them in the daylight and told myself I was being paranoid. At night, those notes felt like proof that I wasn't imagining things. One night, around 2 in the morning, the monitor blared awake. The small screen showed the crib, and there, on the video, was movement. Something dark and thin slid across the far edge of the frame. It was gone in a second, but long enough that I rewinded the video on the monitor and watched the blur move again. My hands moved on their own. I opened the nursery door and peered inside. The crib rail had a small scrape, like someone's finger had dragged across painted wood. I touched it, cool to the touch. I checked the baby. She was asleep, as if untouched. I called my partner at work and told him what I'd seen. He laughed at first, then listened, then said he would come home. When he arrived, he checked every inch of the nursery, flipping over toys, opening vents, testing windows. He found nothing. No camera, no speaker, no sign of anyone else in the room. He told me to stop looking at the monitor and sleep. He promised he would stay up for the next watch. That night, the voice came and said, "She's awake now." The monitor showed nothing. I ran into the nursery and found my daughter sitting up in the crib, eyes wide and fixed on the corner where the ceiling and the wall met. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was just staring. I picked her up and felt her small body tremble once, the way she sometimes did when she was cold. I wrapped her in a blanket and brought her back to our room. I slept on the floor beside the bed with the monitor between us, the green light ticking like a metronome. At dawn, when the light softened the walls, I saw a smear of something dark on the corner of the crib rail where she had been looking. Could have been paint or dirt. Could have been nothing. I cleaned it off anyway and told myself to act normal for the baby's sake. But that evening, the monitor whispered my partner's name. It said it like an invitation. He stood up slowly, his face drained. He walked to the nursery and opened the door. The room smelled faintly of old wood and something else too sweet to name. The crib was empty. The mobile spun slowly. The bars of the crib were clean. No proof of anyone. He turned to me and said we should leave for the day, take the baby to my mother's, stay with family until we figured this out. We packed a bag and left. We drove without speaking much. The baby slept in the back seat, soft in her car seat. I kept checking the monitor app on my phone, though I had turned the nursery unit off. At a red light, my phone lit up with an alert. The monitor had gone online. The app showed live video from the nursery. The feed was dark, but the audio was clear. A voice, layered and soft, said, "She's not alone." Then the line cut. The signal dropped. My phone had no bars. We pulled over and I called my mother. Her voice on the other end was calm and busy, and it steadied me in a way nothing else had. She said we should go straight to the hospital if anything else happened, that a doctor could check the baby and help. I nodded, wanting to believe the problem was medical, something explainable. On the drive, the monitor app lit up again. This time, the audio came through even though the unit was off. It played a faint sound of a lullaby, then a whisper, "She will sleep with me." The words were close, as if someone had put the phone to their mouth. I slammed the phone off and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. My partner started the car again. He drove faster. I still don't know where that voice came from. I don't have an answer for why it knew our names or how it could play through a unit that was unplugged. We moved out of that house a week later. The baby slept in my arms for days. I threw the monitor away. I blocked the app. But sometimes, when she is finally asleep in my arms, I will hear a sound that makes me look at the doorway. A soft breath that is not mine. A rustle like the corner of a blanket. I check my phone just in case. The screen is black. The house is quiet. Yet I remember the way the monitor said my name, and the way my daughter stared at that corner as if she'd seen someone stand there. Would you have thrown the monitor away and left? Or would you have tried to find out who was behind the voice? Story 5. If you ever get a match on a dating app who starts describing your home before you've told them a thing, stop replying. I didn't. I thought it was a weird joke at first. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late and the knock had already come at my door. I'd been single for about a year and bored one night, scrolling through profiles, when his picture popped up. He looked normal, messy brown hair, a shy smile, a hoodie. His bio was bland, just a few emojis and here for a good conversation. We matched instantly. It felt harmless, like the hundreds of other matches I'd had. I was sitting on my couch, one lamp on, the low hum of my fridge coming from the kitchen. My apartment building was quiet, the kind of hush that comes when everyone else is asleep. I remember thinking how nice it was to talk to someone while wrapped in a blanket, the TV on mute. He messaged me first. "Nice place," he wrote. I frowned. My profile had no photos of my apartment. "Thanks," I replied. He sent back, "I like the blue mug." I glanced at the coffee table where my blue mug sat. Empty. I typed, "How do you know about my mug?" No reply came for a full minute. Then, lucky guess. I told myself it was a coincidence. People have blue mugs. It was nothing. We talked about movies, favorite foods, his job at some startup. I asked where he lived. "Not far from you," he wrote. Felt flirty in a strange way. I went back to scrolling, then noticed his messages getting sharper. "You left your kitchen light on," he wrote next. I froze, my phone hovering above my lap. I hadn't mentioned anything about the kitchen. My apartment had no visible windows from the street. I stood up, the blanket falling from my shoulders. I walked to the kitchen and flicked the light off, more out of instinct than anything. "Are you outside my place?" I typed. No reply. The app showed he was still typing, the dots blinking on and off. Then a new message popped up. "The way you look when you're nervous is cute." I shut the curtains and double-locked the door. My building's hallway was empty when I peered through the peephole. I told myself it was someone trying to scare me. But another message came. "Don't check the peephole." "I'm not there." I started to shake. My phone buzzed again. A photo. I opened it and it was my living room, my exact living room, taken from an angle near the corner of the ceiling. I looked up, expecting to see a camera. Nothing. I grabbed a chair and climbed up, running my hand along the edge where the wall met the ceiling. Nothing. My phone buzzed. "Don't bother looking. I'm not in the ceiling." I called my friend, but it rang and rang. Another message. "You should get away from the door now." My pulse raced in uneven bursts. I walked backward into the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find. A cast iron pan. I typed back, "I'm calling the police." His reply came instantly. "They won't get here in time." A knock echoed on my door. 3 slow taps. I didn't move. Another knock, harder this time. My phone buzzed. "Open up. I brought your favorite wine." My stomach dropped. I had mentioned my favorite wine once, joking in a text hours ago. How could he have it now? I backed into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. The knocks grew louder, deliberate. Each one spaced out as if he knew I was counting them. My phone buzzed with another photo. This one was of my bedroom door, taken from the hallway. I dialed 911, whispering my address. The operator's voice was calm but distant. She said help was on the way. I heard a click from the living room, like a door unlocking. My apartment door had a heavy bolt and chain. I had checked it twice. The knock stopped. Silence. Then footsteps, soft, slow, crossing my living room floor. My phone buzzed. "You're not as fun when you're scared." Another photo came through. My reflection in the black screen of my turned-off TV. I didn't remember turning it off. I hid in the closet, clutching the pan, trying to make myself small. The footsteps reached my bedroom door. The handle turned. It didn't open. A pause. Then his voice, calm, almost amused. "You shouldn't hide." He tapped the door once, twice, 3 times. The sound of sirens grew faint outside. My phone buzzed again. "You shouldn't have called them." The footsteps retreated. The front door clicked shut. Silence. Minutes later, police arrived. They searched the apartment top to bottom. No one was there. No sign of forced entry. No hidden cameras. No whine. My phone logs showed no messages. No photos. No match on the app. The profile had vanished. I moved 2 weeks later. New apartment, new number. I don't use dating apps anymore. But sometimes, late at night, my phone buzzes once. No notification. Just a buzz. And I wonder if he still knows where I am. Would you have opened the door? Or would you have stayed locked in the room until morning? Story 6. If you ever hear a soft shuffle behind drywall and tell yourself it's the pipes, don't ignore the feeling that you are being watched. I told myself that for weeks. Then I found a small, folded receipt shoved into the heating vent with my name written on it. The handwriting was messy, like it had been written in a hurry. I kept telling myself it was impossible. Still, something had been inside my walls. I moved into the old brick row house in late autumn. The rent was cheap and the place had character. It had tall windows and original molding. The landlord said the house was solid, just needed a little love. I liked that. My life was messy then. Work was long. The small living room and the tiny kitchen felt like a promise of calm. I slept with the window cracked a little, the fan on low. At night, I listened to distant cars and sometimes to the regular creak of the building settling. I liked routines. They made me feel safe. The first strange thing was a tapping sound. It was late, maybe after midnight. I heard a soft knock-knock, like fingernails on plaster. I lay still and waited. The sound came again, then stopped. I got up, walked around the apartment, and pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I checked the hallway, the thermostat, the baseboard heater. I opened the cabinet under the sink. I knocked on the drywall with my knuckles and heard only my own hollow reply. I went back to bed and told myself it was the building. I told myself many small excuses. A week later, the taps came more often. They moved with a rhythm, like someone marking time. Sometimes there were soft scrapes, like shoe soles dragging inside a thin space. I started leaving a light on in the living room because darkness made everything feel closer. I was curious why the sounds seemed to come from the wall behind my couch. I pulled the couch away and found a small gap where the baseboard didn't sit flush. Dust pooled there. I used a screwdriver to pry a sliver of wood loose. The gap led to dark space, insulation, and a murky crawl area between walls. I peered in with my phone flashlight. I saw nothing but twisted paper and old wiring. Then, tucked in the corner, a folded receipt with my name on it. I held it in my hand and my breath felt wrong. Over the next days, I set traps for the noises. I put a coffee can under the vent, propped a wooden board against the baseboard. I left a thin trail of flour along the floor near the gap. In the morning, the flour was disturbed. My traps had been moved. Once, a small button from my sweater was gone. I found it later wedged under the radiator where my hand could not reach. The idea of someone small was oddly comforting at first. Maybe it was a stray animal. But animals don't leave notes. Night after night, the sounds grew bolder. The soft pacing became slow steps. I heard fabric brushing wood. I heard the faint clink of metal. Once, I heard a voice so soft I thought I had dreamed it. It said my name like someone reading a list. I sat up and listened until the light in the bedroom burned my eyes. The next morning, there was a smear of something dark on the inside edge of the closet door. I scrubbed it away, but the memory of it remained. I tried asking neighbors. They shrugged. They had their own noises. No one had seen anyone. The landlord came by and checked the walls, ran his hands along the baseboards, opened the crawl space under the kitchen. He said the house had had squatters years ago and he sealed the big openings. He assured me everything was fine. He left with a pat on the shoulder and a promise to keep an eye out. I didn't sleep that night. One evening I heard a rustle that sounded like someone moving behind the wall while I was in the shower. The sound stopped when I screamed for whoever it was to show themselves. I dressed and grabbed a flashlight and my keys. I stood in the kitchen with the light off and listened as the house breathed. Then I tapped the wall with the butt of my hand and called out, "If you're in there, come out." There was a pause and then a thin, slow scraping, like something pulling across drywall. It moved down the length of the wall toward the living room. I followed it until the sound stopped at the vent. The vent's grill rattled. I crouched and pried it off. Inside the dark duct, something small shifted away. A faint smell of stale popcorn and dust hit me. I reached in with my hand and felt nothing but cold metal and old paper. I pulled my hand back fast. The next night, I left my front door unlocked and sat with my back to it on the couch, pretending to read. At 2:13 a.m., I heard soft footsteps in the hall outside my apartment. The pattern matched the noise I had heard in the wall. Small steps, then a pause. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Don't be afraid." My skin tightened. I looked up. The hallway light outside my door was on and then off. The apartment above mine had a sliver of light moving. The neighbor's door was ajar and then shut again. I tried to open my mouth and the words stuck. I stood and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The building smelled like old hallway cleanser. Confrontation came by accident. I was moving a lamp and the baseboard pulled away more than usual. Something inside pushed outward. A sliver of fabric caught on the wood. I yanked the board loose and the space opened into a narrow seam 3 feet deep. For a moment I expected to see dark. Instead, the seam revealed a small alcove stuffed with cloth, a battered pillow, and a tangle of food wrappers. There were photographs pinned with thumbtacks to the studs, pictures of my couch, my kitchen table, full-color prints taken from angles no one should have been able to see. I remember one photo as a close-up of the spiral pattern on my bathroom tile. I turned quickly and nearly dropped the flashlight. There was a scuff mark on the wood that looked like a shoe print. It was fresh. I called the landlord then. He came over with a flashlight and a look that told me he had seen this before in other houses in the block. He said little. He asked me quietly if I wanted the police. I said yes. They came and took statements and looked in the seam. They found an old blanket and a plastic container with spoons. No one was in the walls when they checked. The officers patted me on the shoulder and said they would increase patrols. The landlord promised new locks. I drove with the windows down that night and didn't return until morning. For a few days the house was quiet. I breathed. I cleaned the seam and nailed the baseboard back into place. I told myself the problem was solved. Then I found the latest photo taped to the inside of my front door. It was taken from inside the seam. The picture showed me sleeping on the couch from a low angle. I did not remember falling asleep there. The photo had been taken just hours after the police left. There was a note on the back with a single sentence. "Don't block the door." I moved out that week. I left most things behind. The landlord later called to tell me he had sealed the seam with steel and new drywall. He said the building would be checked more often. I wanted to believe him. I wanted the feeling of someone living in my walls to stop following me. But the morning after I moved, I found a small scrap of paper tucked into the hem of the blanket I had taken with me. It read, "Nice bed. Would you have left immediately, or would you have stayed to find out who was living there?" Story 7. If you ever sense someone walking behind you at the same pace, night after night, don't tell yourself it's coincidence. I did. For weeks, I tried to ignore the sound of another pair of footsteps. Then one evening, I turned down a different street and still heard the same measured steps behind me. That's when I understood this wasn't random. I work late at a bookstore in the city. It's a quiet job. Most nights, I close at 10 p.m., lock up, and take the same route home. 3 blocks past a row of old warehouses, across a dimly lit intersection, then up a residential street lined with trees. I liked the predictability. The hum of traffic on the highway nearby was like a lullaby. The smell of roasted peanuts from a street vendor always lingered near the corner. In winter, steam rose from manholes like little ghosts. It was my normal walk home. The first time I noticed him was on a Tuesday. I caught a glimpse of someone in the glass of a darkened shop window. Tall, wearing a hood, maybe 30 feet behind me. It's a city. People walk behind each other all the time. I told myself that. When I turned the corner onto my street, I glanced back. No one was there. I laughed at myself for being dramatic. But then it happened again. Thursday. Same time. Same pace. I heard a steady rhythm of footsteps matching mine half a block back. I sped up. They sped up. I crossed the street. So did he. When I stopped to tie my shoe, the steps paused. When I started walking again, they resumed. I didn't look back this time. I kept walking until I reached my building, key already in my hand, pretending to scroll my phone. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, listening. Nothing but the hum of the elevator. By the next week, it was happening every night. I tried leaving at different times. Once I left early, once an hour late. Still, when I stepped outside, a figure appeared somewhere behind me. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther. I could feel his timing sync with mine. I was curious, so one night I ducked into a bodega halfway down the block and pretended to browse chips. Through the glass front window, I saw him walk slowly past, head down. He never entered, never glanced inside, just kept walking. It became a routine, my steps, his steps. The city's background sounds became a thin curtain. I tried to distract myself with music. I tried calling friends. But even then, I could hear the faint pattern behind me. On nights when it rained, water splashed under his shoes at the same moments mine did. When I turned suddenly, he would be there, always at a distance, never close enough to see clearly. I told myself it might be someone from the neighborhood, but each time I looked for his face, the streetlights seemed to catch only the shadow of his hood. One Friday, I decided to break the pattern. I took a completely different route, through an alley, down a street I'd never used. It was darker there. Trash bins lined the brick walls. Cats darted from the shadows. I walked quickly. Halfway down the alley, a soda can rolled behind me. I turned. At the far end of the alley, a figure stood under a flickering light. Same height, same hood. He didn't move. He didn't speak. I walked faster until I emerged onto a crowded street. When I glanced back, the alley was empty. Sleep became difficult. I kept the kitchen light on. I double-checked the lock on my door. I even pushed a chair against it at night. Each morning, nothing was disturbed. Yet each evening, when I left work, the sound returned. Sometimes, I thought I heard him whisper something, just a syllable, but traffic drowned it out. Once, I felt a gust of warm air at my back, like someone had just exhaled near me. When I spun around, only the empty sidewalk stretched behind me. I tried confronting him. One night I stopped, turned fully, and called out, "Why are you following me?" My voice cracked in the cool air. A delivery truck rumbled past, and for a moment its headlights illuminated the street. There was no one there, but as soon as the truck turned the corner, I heard the steps again. Closer now. I began to run. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment. My hands shook as I fumbled the key. I shut the door, locked it, and slid down onto the floor. Outside, the street was quiet. The next day, I told a coworker. She joked that maybe I had a secret admirer. I didn't laugh. I showed her a blurry photo I'd snapped on my phone. A tall, hooded figure standing across the street from my building at 2 a.m. She stared at it, then at me. "Maybe call the police," she said softly. I did. An officer came, took my statement, and promised to keep an eye on the area. He said without a clear face or evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. I started taking rideshares home instead of walking. The first night, nothing happened. I felt almost relieved. The second night, my driver stopped at a light and glanced into the rearview mirror. "You okay?" he asked. "There's a guy in a hoodie been running after us for 3 blocks. I looked out the back window. Under the yellow glow of the streetlights, a figure jogged along the sidewalk, hood up, head down, matching the car's pace. The driver accelerated. The figure disappeared into the shadows. That night, I left my window open a crack. The street outside was quiet. I sat on my bed and stared at my phone, trying to decide if I should move. Around 3 a.m., a soft knock came at my door. 3 times, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. Another knock. Then silence. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You forgot your umbrella." I hadn't carried an umbrella. I haven't seen his face yet. Sometimes I think I catch a glimpse. A jawline, the edge of a glove, but never enough to be sure. I've changed my route, my schedule, even my apartment. Still, at night when I walk, I hear it. A single set of footsteps matching mine, not too close, not too far. Always there. Always waiting for me to turn around. Would you keep walking and pretend not to notice? Or would you confront him? Story 8. If you ever go into someone else's apartment and find pages taped under the couch cushions, don't assume they are grocery lists. I found a stack of folded notes that described my life in detail. Things I had never told anyone. First, I thought it was a sick joke. By the time I realized what those papers meant, they were already in places only I would find. I had been friendly with my neighbor, Mrs. Lane, for a year. She worked days at a clinic and liked to leave for walks in the late afternoon. We exchanged small favors, watering plants, picking up packages. One week she asked me to collect a parcel for her because she had a minor surgery. She handed me a spare key and said, "Just grab it and leave it on my table." I agreed. Felt normal. Her apartment door was unlocked when I arrived, so I stepped in, called out hello, and walked straight to the kitchen to look for the box. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. It looked lived in. I set the parcel down, and that's when I saw the edge of paper peeking from under the couch. I was curious. I reached down and pulled out a folded note. The handwriting was looped and small. The first line read, "You park in spot 7 on weekends." I frowned. I didn't tell anyone I parked there. I unfolded another. "You hate when people use your toothbrush," it said. I laughed and thought maybe Mrs. Lane kept lists about the building. Then I unfolded the third and my stomach went cold. "You sleep with the lamp on when it storms," it said. I had never mentioned that to her. I felt foolish for being jumpy. I told myself there had to be an explanation. I started looking for more. Behind the TV, I found another note taped to the back of the stand. It was dated last month and had details about my job, my manager's name, the project I had mentioned in passing to a friend. The notes weren't random. They were about me. I checked the package, put it on her table, and left quickly. I told myself I should return the key right away. I told myself I was overreacting. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the notes. The handwriting didn't match any note she had ever left me. I tried to call her, but the number went to voicemail. I told a coworker and they joked that it was probably a neighbor keeping tabs. I should have left it at that. Instead, the next day I went back with an excuse. I said I had forgotten an umbrella. When I stepped into her hallway, my heart felt odd in my chest. The apartment looked untouched. I moved a cushion and found another folded page tucked into the seam. This one had a sentence that made my fingers tingle. "You always check the locks twice. That was a private habit." No one knew that but my sister. My skin prickled, and I pressed the paper flat in my palm. The notes became more specific. "You take the 7:15 bus on Thursdays. You call your mother only when something is wrong. You keep a coffee mug with a chip." I started to feel watched in a way I couldn't name. I kept thinking maybe Mrs. Lane had a pen pal with strange interests. Maybe she collected stories about neighbors. But the handwriting was the same on every note. It was methodical, patient. It read like someone filling a file. I tried to find a pattern. The notes were always in places that made me uncomfortable. Taped under the lampshade, slipped into the spine of a cookbook, folded under a coaster. Once I found one hidden inside a stack of mail, with my full name written on the front in careful block letters. That night, when I returned to my own apartment, I found a note tucked inside the pocket of the jacket I'd left in my closet. It said simply, "Nice scarf." I didn't own that scarf anymore. I had given it away last winter. I called the police after that. They took my statement and asked a few routine questions. They came by Mrs. Lane's apartment and knocked. A young officer walked in with me and asked if she was home. The place was empty, but there were signs that someone had been living there recently. Fresh coffee grounds in the filter, a washcloth on the sink. The officer suggested she might be at the hospital. He took the notes as evidence. I felt relieved for a fragile moment, like someone had finally treated it as real. Later that day, the officer called. They had checked her mail and found that Mrs. Lane had indeed been away for surgery. They asked if I could check the apartment one more time. I went back slowly, keys in my hand, and opened the door with a practiced motion. The living room was neat, but I noticed a new stack of notes under the phone. They had been added since earlier. The handwriting matched the others. One paper was more like a log. It had times and small observations. 8:05 left-hand towel used. 8:18 keys left in lock. 8:30 phone unplugged. It was like whoever wrote them had watched and recorded. My skin went cold. I looked around for cameras and found nothing obvious. The officer promised to keep an eye out on the building. I felt safer for a day. Then my friend told me she had found a note on her windshield in the parking lot. It said, "You drive past the bakery at 7:02. She had no idea who left it. Someone else in the building reported a note on their staircase saying, "You feed the cat on Sundays." It was spreading. The pattern made me feel less alone but more targeted. The notes took on a new tone after that. They stopped listing harmless habits and started offering instructions. Don't answer the door if it's after midnight. Leave shoes outside if you go away overnight. Do not trust the man in the gray hat. The handwriting was still neat, but the words felt like someone trying to protect me or control me. I kept folding the papers and putting them in my pocket, feeling like a character in a story I hadn't written. Then one evening I found a note taped to the inside of my mailbox. It wasn't folded. The paper was fresh. The message was short. Check the third drawer in your nightstand. Adrenaline pushed me up the stairs. I unlocked my door and went straight to the nightstand, fingers shaking. I slid open the third drawer and there it was, a small envelope with my name. Inside was a photograph of me taken through my bedroom window. The photo was recent. My hair was mussed exactly as it had been that morning. Someone had been outside my window and watched me. I wrapped the picture in my hand and drove to the station. The officer there took the photo and asked if I could think of anyone who would do this. I named neighbors, exes, people I had dated. He wrote it down. "We'll check the cameras," he said. "We'll canvass the block." I wanted to believe him. I wanted answers. But that night, when I lay in bed, I checked the locks 3 times and put a chair under the doorknob anyway. In the weeks after, the notes grew colder. "You smile when you walk past the laundromat," one read. "You leave your curtains open on Wednesdays." They were detailed enough that I stopped going out without checking my pockets for paper. One morning, I found a note on my kitchen counter that read, "You will not be alone tonight." The words were heavy and precise. I called the police. They came. They dusted for prints, took photos. They found nothing tied to a suspect. Mrs. Lane returned from the hospital and was confused when I told her. She showed no sign of knowing anything. 2 nights later, as rain hit my windows, I woke to the faintest thump from the corridor. I crept to the peephole and looked out. A figure stood under the stairwell light across the hall, hood up, hands in pockets. He didn't move. He didn't need to. On my door, there was a fresh scrap of paper stuck beneath the mat. I opened it with trembling hands. The note said, "Thanks for reading. Would you confront the person who wrote them, or would you move and try to start over?" Story 9. If your phone rings at night and the voice on the other end knows things about you no one should know, don't answer again. The first time it happened to me, I thought it was a wrong number. By the 3rd call, I realized someone had been inside my apartment while I slept. I live alone in a small, quiet building on the edge of town. Most nights are simple. A late dinner, my favorite chair, soft music low enough to fade into the background. I like routine. I like closing my curtains at exactly 10 and turning the lamp down to a dim glow. The hum of the fridge is usually the only sound. Nothing ever happens here. That night started the same way. The clock on my wall ticked slow and steady. I scrolled my phone, set it on the table, and settled back. I was curious about a number that flashed across the screen just after 11. It was a local area code, but not saved in my contacts. I hesitated and answered. At first, there was nothing. Just a faint hiss like someone breathing far away. "Hello?" I asked. A man's voice said my name softly. I hung up, convinced it was a prank. A minute later, my phone lit up again. Same number. This time the voice said, "Don't go near the window." My heart thudded, but I told myself it was a friend playing around. I didn't go near the window anyway. The curtains were drawn, but a small gap let in the yellow glow of the streetlight. I could feel eyes in that gap. I shook it off, locked my door again, and sat down. I tried to forget it. I turned the TV on low volume and stared at a cooking show. Half an hour passed. Then the phone rang a third time. "You left the back door unlocked," the voice said. My stomach tightened. I don't have a back door. Only one entrance. I hung up. I checked the lock again. Then the windows. All secure. I told myself someone must have hacked my phone. That was easier to believe than the alternative. The calls kept coming, each time a new detail. The brand of mug in my kitchen, the book on my nightstand, the color of the socks I was wearing. I had told no one these things. My mind raced. Could my landlord have hidden cameras? Had a delivery person taken notes? The voice was calm, not taunting. It sounded like someone reading from a list. I unplugged the phone and turned it off. For a few minutes, there was silence. Then the landline rang. I don't use my landline. I don't even give out that number. There's a dusty relic on a side table. When it rang, the sound cut through the quiet. I lifted the receiver slowly. "I can see you," the voice said. My throat went dry. "Who is this?" I asked. No answer. Just the click of the line going dead. I decided to leave. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and jacket and headed for the door. My hand was on the knob when my cell phone buzzed with a text. It said, "Don't leave." I dropped the phone. The hallway outside my door was empty. The elevator was on another floor. I forced myself to step into the corridor anyway, locking my door behind me. I walked down the hall fast, head low, heart hammering. The building was silent. Outside the air smelled like rain. I crossed the parking lot to my car, fumbling for my keys. My phone buzzed again. Another text, "Nice car." I spun around but saw only shadows. The street light flickered. A neighbor's curtain shifted. Nothing else moved. I unlocked the car, slid inside, and locked the doors. I drove aimlessly for an hour. Gas stations, empty intersections, neighborhoods I didn't know. The whole time the phone kept buzzing. New texts. "You passed the church. You turned left too soon. You're almost out of gas." I threw the phone on the passenger seat and kept driving. At a red light, I glanced at the screen. One new message, "Check your back seat." My stomach flipped. Slowly, shaking, I turned my head. The back seat was empty. I pressed the gas too hard when the light changed. Eventually, I stopped at a 24-hour diner. Bright lights, a couple of truckers at the counter, a waitress refilling mugs. I went inside, ordered coffee, and tried to look normal. My phone sat face down on the table. When I finally turned it over, there was just one new text. "You left the TV on." I'd been watching that cooking show. They couldn't have known unless they'd been inside. I called the police from the diner phone. They sent a patrol to check my apartment. When the officer called back, he said everything looked normal. No signs of forced entry. No one inside. He sounded polite but unconcerned. "Maybe a scammer," he said. "Turn your phone off for the night." I hung up feeling stupid. I finished my coffee and drove home. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Lamp on. TV muted. Locks in place. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. I locked the door and slid a chair under the knob anyway. I turned my phone off and left it on the counter. I crawled into bed fully dressed, telling myself I'd call a friend in the morning. Sleep came slow. Somewhere around 4 a.m., I woke to the sound of my cell vibrating. It was on, screen glowing faintly. It had turned itself on. The same number flashing. I let it ring. It stopped. A moment later, the landline rang. I sat up, staring at it. I didn't move. The machine picked up. My own voice played back, whispering my name. Then the line went dead. I haven't answered any unknown calls since. I changed my number. I got a new phone. But last night, at 11:07, a text came through from an unknown sender. It said, "Look outside." I did. There was no one there. Just the faint glow of the streetlight and the gap in my curtain. Would you answer the call, or would you smash the phone and run? Story 10. If you ever live with someone who keeps a locked diary, never open it. What I found inside my roommate's diary convinced me that she had known everything about me long before we met, and maybe even before I was born. I moved into the apartment 6 months ago. It was a good deal for the city. 2 bedrooms, old hardwood floors, tall windows, and a little balcony that overlooked a quiet street. My new roommate, Claire, was polite but distant. She worked nights at a hospital and spent her days reading or writing in a thick, leather-bound diary she kept on her desk. We rarely talked beyond small talk about bills or chores. Still, the place felt safe. I liked hearing the faint city sounds outside, the occasional car passing, the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Our routines didn't overlap much. She'd leave for her shift just as I was getting home from mine. On weekends, she locked herself in her room to write. Sometimes I'd see her sitting at the table with the diary open, writing fast, not looking up when I passed. She always carried the diary to her room at night. I thought it was just her way of keeping a journal. One rainy Saturday, she left in a hurry for a double shift and forgot to lock her bedroom door. I went in to grab my laundry basket, which had ended up in her closet by mistake. Her desk lamp was still on, the diary lying closed on the desk. It looked heavy, the pages bulging. A silver key hung from a string next to it. I told myself not to touch it. Then I saw my name on a loose sheet tucked under the cover. My name, written neatly in blue ink. I was curious. I reached for the diary, hands trembling, and turned the key. It opened with a soft click. The first page I saw wasn't about her day or her job. It was about me. She came home late again. She doesn't know I've been watching. The entry was dated the week I moved in. The next page had a sketch of my bedroom, down to the position of my bed and the lamp on my nightstand. Another page listed details about my life I had never told her. My childhood address, my mother's maiden name, the name of my high school boyfriend. I stared at the words, my pulse rising. I hadn't shared these things with anyone in years. I flipped to another entry. She thinks she found this place on her own. She thinks I'm just a roommate. She has no idea. No idea about what? I read on. Tonight she'll wake up at 3:17. She'll think it's a dream. My stomach turned. The clock on her desk read 2:50. I slammed the diary shut and backed away. My laundry basket fell to the floor with a thud. I locked myself in my room, clutching my phone. I wanted to call someone, but what would I say? That my roommate's diary had my life inside it? That she knew when I'd wake up? I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the digital clock. 3:10. I tried to stay awake, but my eyelids felt heavy. At 3:17 exactly, I jolted upright. I had heard something, a soft creak like footsteps. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. The hallway outside was dark. In the morning, Claire was gone. The diary was back on her desk, locked. The key was no longer there. I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe she'd looked me up online. Maybe the times were coincidence. I tried to go about my day, but every time I passed her door, I imagined her writing my name again. Days went by. More strange things happened. I'd wake to find my bedroom lamp turned on when I was sure I'd turned it off. My toothbrush moved to a different spot. One night, I found a small note under my pillow. Stop reading. The handwriting matched the diaries. I never told her I'd opened it. How did she know? I decided to confront her. I waited until she left for work, then searched her room again. The diary was gone. In its place was a new, smaller notebook with my name written across the cover. It wasn't locked. Inside were fresh entries about things I had just done that day, buying groceries, a phone call to my sister, what I had eaten for lunch. The last entry read, "She's behind me right now." I spun around. The room was empty. My own reflection stared back from the window. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the diary, the notes, the sketch of my room. Around 3 a.m., I heard the front door click. I peeked out and saw Claire come in, diary tucked under her arm. She didn't look at me. She went straight to her room and closed the door. I waited a few minutes, then crept down the hall. Her door was ajar. Inside she sat at the desk, writing. The pages were filled with my name over and over. I backed away before she saw me. The next morning she was gone again. On my kitchen table was another note. You should leave now. That was 3 days ago. I haven't left yet. Every time I try, something stops me. A sudden phone call, a knock at the door, a feeling that she's right outside. Last night the diary appeared on my bed. The entry read, "She thinks she's writing her own story. She isn't. Would you have opened the diary? Or would you have left it locked forever?"